Tuesday, August 17, 1943, a date of awesome significance in the history of World War II. American bombers had penetrated the Luftwaffe's most savage and determined fighter defense umbrella to destroy one of Germany's key targets, the Messerschmitt aircraft works. For Hitler's Germany, this was an unbelievable shock. For the fledgling United States 8th Air Force, barely a year old and operating out of bases in England, it proved conclusively the case for daylight precision bombing of enemy targets. The 3rd Division was commanded by a young colonel by the name of Curtis LeMay. His outstanding leadership in directing his crews from the lead plane was truly remarkable. His performance was to have a profoundly favorable impact on future command assignments and responsibilities. Now, it's General LeMay. And I'm certain he still remembers August 17, 1943. You won't have any trouble if I ask you about the importance of that mission then. Why was it so important?
Well, I think it was a combination of the two targets that we wanted to hit on this mission that made it so important. The other target was Schweinfurt. I first heard of the mission early in July of 1943 when General Aker came out visited my headquarters and told me about the importance of the ball bearing factories at Schweinfurt and the desirability of hitting them as early as possible. This was exceptionally important at the time because this is the deepest that we'd ever penetrated into Germany, and we had very few fighters and they didn't have their belly tanks yet, and we didn't have the P-51s yet. So we'd have to accomplish this mission, a great deal of it, without fighter escort. So it called for some unusual planning. And the plan was that the 3rd Division, which was the newest form and had the latest B-17s with the longer range tanks, would lead the 8th Air Force in, bypassing Schweinfurt and hitting the Messerschmitt plant over on the Austrian border, which was an important target in that it produced a great percentage of the 109 fighter airplanes that were being turned out at the time. And then instead of coming back to England and fighting the German Air Force on the way back, we would go out through the Brenner Pass over northern Italy and land down in North Africa.
A forecast of the importance of the mission scheduled for today was evident as the ground crews prepared the giant bombers for combat. Orders from headquarters of the 8th Air Force called for a maximum effort operation. All flyable planes were scheduled to take part with extra fuel and ammunition aboard. One of the major problems that plagued advanced planning in England was the unpredictable weather, and this mission was no exception. Half the forces committed to the operation, including the all-important fighter support, experienced a costly delay in takeoff, placing the entire mission in jeopardy. Of the many bomber units participating, the 100th Bomb Group crews took an especially heavy beating. Of the 21 fortresses that left their base in England early that morning, 9 had been shot from the skies before the target at Regensburg had been reached. Captain Everett Blakely had proven to be a skillful pilot and a natural-born leader. He was only 24 years old when he was assigned the responsibility of leading the entire 100th Bomb Group formation on this critical shuttle mission to North Africa. Our guests are 2 men who were there, Ev Blakely and Bob Wolff. So let's start with you, Ev. If you were to sum up the importance of the Regensburg raid, would it be the damage? Would it be the target?
The thing that made this very significant as a mission was strategy. Our strategy in bombing was precision bombing in daylight, and the British had their night bombing. And this was the first big test of our 8th Air Force bombing strategically deep in Germany, pinpointing target and taking on enemy action and hopefully getting back without severe losses. This was the big test for our strategy as an Air Force.
Now, let me ask Bob, do you remember that day particularly, Bob? The weather or anything else special?
I remember the day, and I remember the weather. It was a beautiful day once we got over the channel and over onto the continent. Beautiful blue sky. We crossed the coast, give or take a few minutes, about 10 o'clock in the morning, and we were jumped by the fighters from that moment on.
How long did this last, Bob?
About 2 hours.
2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's you mentioned how long 2 or 3 minutes could be.
Well,
I hate to
it
try and
seemed like
stretch.
an eternity. About 5 minutes before we actually started the bomb run, the fighters, for some reason, disappeared. Maybe it was a small prayer that I uttered. I don't know.
They
But-
disappeared
Well, at least they quit bothering us to
just
that
before
extent.
the target.
Yeah.
So you had a clear run at the target?
We had a pretty clear run at the target and managed to plaster it very well.
We had excellent results on our bombing, and the plant was not completely destroyed, but it was completely out of action for about 3 months.
Could you see the bomb hits?
Yes, yes.
I mean, you could see the success as it was taking place.
Yes, and we took pictures as it was taking place. Of course, after the first bombs hit, there's nothing but a lot of smoke around there. The pictures are not much good to strike photos, but you could tell whether they got in the target area or not. And then we usually followed it up with what we call post-strike reconnaissance to show the results after the fires as smoke had cleared away.
So the bombing mission itself, despite the losses, was a success.
Was a success, yes.
Now, beyond that, you've now hit the target, but you're a long way from home.
Yes, we are. It's a long ways to North Africa, and we've gone through a pretty hectic experience, and the command is straggling out in spots that I didn't like. So after leaving the target, I made a couple free circles to get them back together again before going across Italy, because we might have gotten fighter attacks from Italian-based fighters.
But that circle's going to use up some more gas.
Well, that's right. It's a compromise of trying to get your troops in the best possible position for another attack, but at the same time you're using up gasoline that you might need at the other end.
Now you've got a tight group going across the Alps, and
Well,
I would think
not
that's
as-
hazardous.
Not as tight as I'd like it. When we got on the other side, I decided I'd better close them up a little bit more, so we made a couple circles over Lake Como to get in better shape. Then went on down between the mainland of Italy and Sardinia and Corsica at sea, and went on into North Africa.
But you're now all running out of gas over the Mediterranean.
We're low on gasoline. Some of the airplanes, actually, we dropped a couple, three in the Mediterranean. I think we lost one crew in the Mediterranean. 2 crews, I think, were picked up by the sea rescue people.
We'd had severe tail damage to our aircraft that was causing us to use more gasoline than we had anticipated. And as we crossed the Mediterranean on our way into Africa, all the red lights started blinking on the gas gauges, which indicated we were getting pretty low. And as we made our final approach to land, we simply could not go around, even though the tower at the field had told us to. the aircraft simply would not get up any more speed. When we did get off the runway, we got far enough off and I just cut the engines and stopped right there.
Our landing was quite normal at Trolegma.
How many planes left?
Nine left out of the 21 we started out with.
Where'd you stay, Bob, if there wasn't any base, there wasn't any town?
Well, this was sort of an emergency field, and that first night we camped out underneath the aircraft because the dirt felt better than the inside of the aircraft at that point.
When was your first chance to kick up your heels in happiness at completing this tough mission?
Well, if you don't count the wild motorcycle ride across the field in the middle of the night to report in, the next day when we flew to Marrakesh, we all headed for the nearest ice cream parlor.
And now, North Africa, and not at all what you expected or had arranged for.
No, North Africa, the war had moved on. There was no depot at Trolegma. There's a small detachment there. We had the problem then of gathering my force because all of them didn't land at Trolegma. Some of them were so short of gas that they landed at the first spot they could get down. So they were scattered at some other fields, and I got them all together the next morning, those that were flyable. And then we had the problem of getting back in shape for the mission to come home.
I'm just wondering if there wasn't anything there, how'd you get gas? Where'd you sleep? Where'd you eat?
Well, they had a detachment there, and it broke out some emergency rations, and we got something to eat, not much. The beer was pretty good, though.
That makes up for a lot.
There was a brewery operating in nearby that made something closer to American beer than we got in England, and that was very good. We got something to eat, and people slept in the airplanes or under the wing. It was nice warm weather and that time.
I was thinking suddenly dropping down into the Mediterranean for a little bathing must have been quite that's a real contrast to England.
It was, and young people, 19, 20 years old, most of them had never seen Africa or been out of the country before, and they became tourists very rapidly. But I finally, you can't do that until you get your airplane ready to go back. Get it gas, get the bombs loaded. If you need any holes patched and things of that sort, I got some help from a nearby bomb group that sent some people over to do the technical work that the crews couldn't do. After they got their airplanes ready to go, and we were there for 3 days before we went back, and we finally got about 85 airplanes flyable to go home with out of the 125 we started with.
The importance of the return to England by Colonel Curtis LeMay and the B-17 Flying Fortresses from North Africa was indicated by the presence of the top brass from 8th Air Force Headquarters at his base to greet Colonel LeMay upon his arrival. He had led the 3rd Division bombers on this historic mission. They were vitally interested in a briefing by Colonel LeMay as to the results and other details of this, the most important strategic air mission carried out in Europe up to that time.
I was happy with the mission because when we got the target, which is important, we had to pay an admission price, yes. But if you miss the target and have to go back again, the price is higher. It seemed to me that in the early days where we really didn't have enough over there to get anything much done, about all we accomplished was to train the Luftwaffe on...
General, you started out at the bottom and you went all the way to the top of the Air Force. Was there anything wrong at the top?
Top had to learn too. For instance, I had to learn how to be a commander. I'd never commanded anything in the Air Force before, and there I find myself commanding a division as a colonel when I had no command experience. I had to learn my job too. Everybody had to learn from the ground up.